All right, welcome back to 1% Man Podcast. I got my good friend here, David LeVeille, with me. Brother, how you doing today?
I'm doing great. Thanks for having me, Bertrand.
Hey, man, I'm glad that we got to connect. I think this is going to be a very special episode, especially because, one, me and your brother were deployed together, all right? And after that, told me about the story. A fucking just tragic, right? American story that should be told, but also the fact that we're actually going to be sharing it live here today for the first time ever. So let's get right into it. So David LeVeille, who are you and what are we going to be sharing today?
Well, as you said, my name is David LeVeille. I'm the oldest son of FBI Special Agent Paul LeVeille. And so we're going to be talking a bit about my dad. He died in 1999, and so we're going to be talking about, some of the circumstances behind how he died, why he died, and, what's going on with that today.
Okay, perfect. I like that. So now let's get more into it. All right. So Paul LeVeille, your father, tell me about him as a man. Like, who was he? What did he like? Just tell us more so us and the listeners can get to know more about your dad.
Well, my dad was a very, very, very family-oriented individual, a very capable, very talented career man as well. He spent 16 years in the military, in the Air Force and the Army, and 3.5 years in the FBI. He grew up as a military brat. His dad was a career Air Force man, and I think if my dad had lived, he probably would have retired from the military, after, doing his 20 years. And, he started out in the Air Force. He was going to go the Air Force route. He spent 4 years enlisted, and he was an intelligence analyst in the Electronic Security Command. And so he did that for 4 years, and he did very well in it. He promoted to E5 in 2.5 years, so he was doing very well with that. But after...
Don't shy over that point. Could you tell us how remarkable that is, especially in intelligence?
That is a very uncommon feat. To hit E5 in 2.5 years is very impressive. To do that when you're working in a very small career field like intelligence, that's even harder to do because there's not a whole lot of
slots to go up in there
to move up.
Yep,
yeah,
exactly.
That pyramid gets very small very quick.
True.
So that's a very impressive thing to be able to do that, and that's the kind of individual he was. Whatever he did, he was always very competitive. Always very, very goal oriented, very driven, very hardworking, phenomenal work ethic. And just incredibly driven, and. So yeah, he did very well in the Air Force, and then, after he did his 4 years, he had done some college. He decided to go back to college. He finished up his bachelor's degree, and then I think while he was getting his degree, he started talking with the Army Guard, and they offered him the opportunity to go to flight school, and he was like, "That sounds great." So after finishing college, he signed with them, and they sent him to flight school to become a helicopter pilot, and he loved that. So he started flying helicopters for the Army Guard in Maine, and he did that for a number of years, and then he transferred from Maine down to New Mexico, and at some point there, he got deployed during Desert Storm. And he actually got some combat experience flying medevac helicopters during Desert Storm. And after that, he went on to do drug interdiction missions. He was planning and orchestrating drug interdiction missions for quite a while at the southern border. And while he was doing that, he had one of his coworkers there was a former police officer, and he saw that the FBI was hiring, and he was interested. So he decided to apply, and he asked my dad, to go with him and apply as well. And my dad wasn't interested at first, but the guy talked him into it. So they both ended up going, and The other guy didn't actually end up making it.
Funny how that always works out.
Yeah. But my dad did make it through.
Yeah.
And then he went through the very long hiring process and ended up actually becoming an agent. And yeah, very quickly, again, he was like looking, okay, what are the opportunities here? What's, the most challenging? Okay, that's where I want to go. He
Yeah.
identified the FBI has, a few elite units in their critical incident response group, and the top tier one is HRT, the hostage rescue team.
Oh, yeah.
So immediately, he just locked his eyes on HRT. He was like, that's where I want to go.
Yeah.
That was his goal. So he knew that HRT looks for pilots who are both helicopter and fixed wing certified. And he was good to go in the helicopter realm. He had like 1,600 flight hours in helicopters,
Incredible.
combat experience.
Yeah.
He was good to go with that. So it was just the fixed wing where he needed to round some things out. So he paid on his own dime and on his own time to get his private pilot license, fixed wing. And so once he had that, then he asked the FBI to start sending him to some of their more advanced flight schools, which they were happy to do. And so then he just started going through, like they had an aerobatics school, they had a number of other different schools, and he just started going through those, racking up experience and credentials. Somewhere along the line, he got his commercial pilot license as well, and he was just moving along, getting the experience that he needed, all the credentials and everything that, to make him a very attractive candidate for HRT.
Oh man, that's amazing. That's so amazing. But I think that something that, a lot of people don't know about your father is just about how present he was. Even though he was a super high performer, you were telling me, before the show that even though he was a high performer and he was great at his job and he was a super busy dad, but when he was at home, he was locked in and present with you guys. Can you tell us a little more about that?
Oh yeah. So there's 6 kids in my family, 3 boys, 3 girls, My mom and dad, they both wanted a big family. And, my dad was always busy. He always had work. But at the same time, he was like, when he was home, he was like 100% focused on his family. Like, work is gone, it's all family, And, he may have died when I was young, but, I remember he took me on my first fishing trip, like, he taught me how to shoot. I got my first gun at the age of 5. He did not waste any time, just like delving into his kids' lives. My 2 older sisters, he was teaching them ham radio. He helped us start our first business, a vending machine business. He taught me a little bit about driving out in the desert, as like a little kid, he was very involved. He loved to do stuff with his kids, and he really didn't have time for it, but somehow he made the time for it, Yeah, he was very much a family man.
No, I love that. I love that. And especially, I think the memories that you have of your father. And I think anybody would love to have a father that's present like that, But, I think that the biggest question right now that I think probably everyone's asking is why now? Because it's been over 20 years,
Yeah.
right, since this happened. But why should it matter now? And it's kind of a 2-part question. One, personally for you, why does it matter? But also for the listeners and the Americans out there, why does it matter to them? So let's start with you first and let's hit that other question. So why personally for you, why does it matter now?
Okay, so for me, it matters because, I grew up not really having any answers about how and why my dad died. The FBI gave us the most brief little Cliff's Notes, like a little paragraph kind of explanation of what happened to him. We never even got to see the body. When my dad was buried, I asked to see his body. My oldest sister asked to see his body, and my mom asked to see his body. And the FBI told us all no. Like, they made the choice for us to not see that body, which really was not their choice to make. And they withheld so much information from us that we never really understood what happened. To this day, I've never seen the man who was in the plane with my dad when he died. 25 years later, a quarter of a century, I've still never seen the guy's face. I don't even know what the guy looked like who was in the plane with my dad when he died. That's kind of insane, And so, we've always had questions. Your mind just goes wild, wondering, and asking all these questions. And so we're at this point now, I've had to file FOIA requests to get the answers that I want and that I deserve, that my whole family deserves. We should have had this information a long time ago. But I've had to file Freedom of Information Act requests to get that information. And the FBI is stonewalling me, and multiple other federal agencies are stonewalling my FOIA requests as well. And, it's just not right that we should still be having answers, still having questions, and not have gotten all of that answered up front 25 years ago.
Yeah.
So that's, for me, that's why
Personal.
why it matters now. It's personally, I want that closure, and I deserve those answers. And for the American people, it's also relevant because what I have been able to find out about my dad's death, I know that the FBI was responsible for my dad's death, and that's something that they did not want known, and they've done their best to cover up, and they're still doing their best to cover that up and keep it quiet. And that's something that should matter to the American people, because to live in a country where the people who fight and die for this country, who are serving overseas. My dad was a combat veteran. If the unelected bureaucrats in this country can just allow people like him to be killed in the line of duty because they're grossly negligent, and then they cover that up, that's not okay. And the American people need to know about that, because the Constitution begins, we the people. It is government for the people, by the people. And, it's very relevant to the people to know what's happening to, the service people who are, enforcing the laws, serving and protecting to uphold the Constitution. It's very relevant for the people to know what's going on, and to make sure that it's not a completely corrupt system that's unaccountable.
True. Accountability
Yeah.
is mandatory, especially for all of us. But and I appreciate that heartfelt message. I definitely feel that. So my heart out to you and your family.
Thank you.
You're welcome. But let's get right into it. What did the FBI, FAA, and I believe it's the NTCB, right?
NTSB, yes.
NTSB. What did they say overall about the investigation with your father's death? What was the underlining message?
So it was mostly the FBI and NTSB doing the bigger investigations, and the final conclusion from both of them was basically the same. They declared it to be an accident, and they declared it to be the civilian flight instructor's fault. They placed all the blame on him. It was his in-flight decision-making errors that resulted in the crash. And my analysis of the facts that I've seen, that's not the correct conclusion to arrive at in my analysis. When I look at it, I do see, the flight instructor could have and should have done things better, but so should the FBI, and so should the private contractor, the company that he was working for. They should both have done much, much better, especially the FBI. They hired the private contractor, and for 3 years, they had the opportunity to go in there and inspect the training and make sure that it was being done safely, that it was being done, up to FBI standards, that they were using the right instructors, that they were using the right aircraft. And they never did. They never did. They even admit in their report that they had conversations about, oh yeah, we should probably go in there and inspect the training, but they never did. They make excuses like, oh yeah, scheduling errors and all this, but come on, you can't say you had scheduling errors for 3 years. Come on, it's your job. It's literally your job. The director of flight training, that is his job, to go in there and inspect the flight trainings that the FBI is doing. So how did you have scheduling errors that were more important than going and inspecting a flight school that the FBI is sponsoring? And not just a flight school, but an ultra hazardous one. This was one of the most dangerous ones that they had. There may have only been one flight school more dangerous than the mountain flying school. That was the aerobatics school, which my dad had attended. This one was definitely one of the most hazardous flight schools that the FBI had. And they just never got around to inspecting it. It's insane. It's insane. And yet they come to the conclusion that they're not responsible. It was the civilian flight instructor because he made some in-flight decision-making errors. Like, no, my dad was in the wrong airplane because the FBI didn't come and inspect. So the private contractor got away with using a lesser aircraft and taking shortcuts. That never would have happened if they had shown up and done their job and made sure that the right aircraft were being used. They used a completely unauthorized aircraft that was significantly underpowered from the aircraft they should have been using.
Okay. Got you. So tell me more about, let's go right into this investigation, right? So the investigation, after your dad dies, you guys get bombarded and then get berated by this attorney, right? Who is this attorney and why do you believe he has a link to this?
So our attorney's name was Philip J. Kolzinski.
Yep.
He was a former Marine pilot. He previously worked for the DOJ as an in-house attorney there. He worked for the FAA as an in-house attorney there. And he was, at the time that we hired him, he was an aviation law specialist. He'd also been on the board of directors for the American Bar Association in California there. So he was a very, very well-known and, his resume was outstanding.
Yeah, he's been around.
Yeah, he definitely looked impressive. But what he didn't tell us is the big part here. He had some secrets that he did not tell us. So the American Bar Association has ethical standards that they set for attorneys.
Yes.
And one of these is an attorney has a duty to disclose to even a potential client that they haven't worked with yet, to disclose any, not just conflicts of interest, but even a potential conflict of interest. If there potentially could be a conflict of interest, they need to disclose that. And they need to disclose it in writing, explaining to the potential client, here's the potential conflict of interest, and here's why it's a potential conflict of interest. So that the client can understand that, and then the client can sign off and say, okay, I understand that, I'd still like you to represent me, or they can say, okay, now that I understand that, I don't want you to represent me. And then my understanding of it is that the judge in the case would also need to look at that and also approve it and say, determine whether or not it's okay. Well, our attorney had multiple potential conflicts of interest, which I think then became real conflicts of interest once he became our attorney.
Can you list out these conflicts of interest for us, please?
Yes. So having previously worked for the DOJ was a potential conflict of interest because the FBI was a party in this whole situation of my dad's death. And so
Bless you.
So having worked for the DOJ, the FBI is a part of the DOJ. So that's a conflict right there because, having connections in that organization, there's a potential that he might look out for their interests more than our interests.
Exactly.
Then he also worked for the FAA. Of course, the FAA was also involved because it's an aviation crash.
Okay.
So the same deal, he could also have had a conflict of interest there. And then there's the fact that he was referred to my mom by agents within the FBI, which again is inappropriate and another conflict of interest because it shows he had connections in the FBI. And so not disclosing that conflict as well is another problem. And it's particularly suspicious with that one because those agents were unnamed. They didn't choose to give us their names, they chose to remain anonymous. And so we don't know who they are. And for all we know, they could have been involved in the whole crash. There were agents, high-level agents in the FBI who were directly responsible for my dad's death. Well, what if one or more of those agents were the ones referring him to my mom? So, it was a very, very inappropriate situation that he never explained to her, he never disclosed that to her. And he was also very unethical in how he pressured my mom to hire him very fast after her husband's death. My dad died September 1st, 1999.
September 1st, yep.
By the beginning of October, he had already pressured my mom into signing a contract with him. We have letters from him in the middle of September already messaging her about, hey, we need to get on a phone call and start talking about this. I mean, my mom had funeral arrangements to schedule. She had grieving to do. She had grieving kids to deal with, travel arrangements. Like, she had a lot on her plate. And he's already just coming right out of the gate. Hire me. He didn't recommend her to go and get, independent counsel, to go over the contract with her and, tell her if they thought that it was fair and balanced. When I look through it, and my other brother is a certified paralegal, and him and I have looked through it quite a bit together. And we think that contract is very unethically written, and that's something that would have come to light if she had had an independent attorney to look at it. Yeah. She's a grieving widow. She doesn't know what she's looking at in that moment, and he really took advantage of her and of us kids in that crisis. Yeah, very, very exploitative type of individual. Yeah.
Okay. Now, plainly, I want you to explain to the people real quick, why is this a cover-up? What in this whole situation that you just explained to us, right? Because high-level overview, but tell us really, what is it that makes this whole thing a cover-up?
Well, there's so the FBI and NTSB both ignored critical damning evidence, like the fact that my dad was flying in a completely unauthorized aircraft. They just glossed over that fact. I don't think the NTSB report even mentions it. The FBI report mentions it as like an associated causal factor, but they don't mention it in their final conclusion. Their final conclusion is the flight instructor alone was responsible. And yet, both the FBI and the flight school were both responsible for the fact that my dad was not flying in a correctly authorized aircraft and that he was flying in an underpowered aircraft. That's a huge detail to overlook. And there's numerous other big details like that as well that also just get glossed over. They're mentioned but not highlighted. And there could be many other smoking guns which I'm not even aware of, because our attorney was so grossly biased in representing us. Not only did he not seem to have our best interests at heart, but he withheld 75% of the FBI's investigative report from his own clients. The parts that he withheld are the most important parts. He gave us the narrative report, so their analysis of all the evidence. But the part that he withheld is all the evidence that they used to draw their conclusions from. So he decided to withhold all of that from us. And he did write in a letter to my mom, if you want to ask me for that information, then I'll send it to you. But he'd already said prior that he was just going to send it all to her. And then when he got it, he didn't. He only sent her 25% of it. And then that never got sent to us. So we never got the whole thing. And we never got our whole file. We never got a report from him on his investigative findings on what all happened. And so he really did a very poor job of conveying to us the information that we needed to have. And he did a very poor job of preserving information for the six, there were 7 of us named in this case,
Yes.
6 kids and the mom.
Yep.
And the 6 of us kids were not involved in the case because we were all very young at the time. And it's like, he doesn't seem to think that when they get older, they might be interested in learning more about their dad's death. No, he just decides to keep our file, and eventually it was destroyed. He never gave us a report, and he withheld the FBI's report. And so we think that he was working with the FBI to withhold as much information from us as possible so that we wouldn't know what happened and we couldn't discuss it publicly and embarrass the FBI, or worse yet, come after them in court, or have other people come after them in court for the things that they did.
Yeah. Thank you so much for that. I appreciate that. Now, real quick, let's talk about your new book coming out. So you have a new book that's coming out, and you're going to be sharing details and going into more explanation and reasons about this, right? Why are you writing this book right now?
Well, there's a lot of information for to explain to people about what has happened here. And it's not something that you can explain in a couple quick sound bites. There's a big story here. There's a lot of details to really lay the facts out for people.
True.
And I feel like a book is probably the best way to really do that, to walk people through all of those important details. And so I'm writing the book to help convey that story in an efficient way, and also to preserve my dad's legacy as well.
Yeah. That's I think that's a phenomenal idea. And something that I like that you told me that you're doing too is that you started a Twitter in the memory of your father, and also to get the story out there. What's the handle of that Twitter? And what's the handle of that Twitter?
So my @ on Twitter is David P. LeVeille. That's my full name.
Make sure to add that to the bottom right there so they can see it if they're watching it. But say it again so they can hear that. David
P. LeVeille.
David P. LeVeille. Okay, we'll make sure to add that in the show notes as well for people. So
And if people are interested in following me on YouTube, I'm starting a YouTube channel as well. Sweet. And that one is @Truth is Treason on YouTube.
Truth is Treason, all lowercase, one word altogether.
Yeah.
Okay, perfect. Now, before we head out, real quick, just tell us again, why should people take action and go follow you right now?
Well, I mean, if you're an American listening, if you're an American citizen, your freedoms are preserved by you taking action, and this is something that affects every American citizen, not just me, not just my family. If you want to live in a country where the rule of law is respected and where everybody is accountable to the law, then, that's an important enough reason to take action here and start raising your voice, start saying something, start doing something. Start sharing the story, spreading the message, calling your representatives. You have to take action. Freedom doesn't preserve itself. Freedom is preserved by people taking action to preserve it.
I freaking love that. David, thank you so much for coming, brother.
Thank you for having me, Bertrand.
Hey, and on the 1% Man podcast, progress over perfection. You heard it here first. Cut.